Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 147 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We appreciate you being here. Whether you're watching us later on or whether you're with us now, we appreciate you and hope you've been having a good day. We've had some beautiful weather up here in Jonesboro. It's been a beautiful past couple of days, so we've been really enjoying it, enjoying getting out. It's been warming up, which is to my liking. I know some people don't like the warm weather, but I'm a fan of it, and so I'm glad it's warming up a little. But regardless of that, we hope that you've been having a good week so far. We want to always let you know that that you have an invitation to join us at Portia if you're ever in the area during one of our services. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. Right now, we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning for Bible class and service. And then it's 5 o'clock on Sunday night and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so if you're in the area, I hope you know you always have an invitation to come and join us. Right now, we're doing a class on some of the lesser-known New Testament characters on Sunday morning. And on Wednesday night, we're doing a class on the book of Matthew. We're gone all the way through the Gospels, or not all the way through this particular Gospel, and we're on chapter 27, I believe. So we got the very end of it. And so we've been having a good study on that. But if you're in the area, I hope you feel welcome to join us. And also, if you have any suggestions, if you have any comments, if you have anything to add to this discussion, that we have tonight, then feel free to send that our way as well. We would love to hear from you, love to hear what you think, and have you participate in this as well. We always enjoy hearing from you and hearing what you think about what we study here tonight. But tonight we do have a special guest with us. We have Garison Money. He is here with us, and he is going to be joining us for this study. I know you're going to enjoy what he has to say, and he's going to, as we're going to study, I believe it's Numbers chapter 13 and 14 in the report of the spies. Now, Garison, it's great to have you here with us tonight. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, good evening. It's really great to be here with you guys. I grew up in Paragould, Arkansas, and went to Crowley's Ridge Academy. And then when I graduated the academy, went to Crowley's Ridge College. So Seth and I know a lot of the same people, crossed paths a couple times, and it's been just amazing to know him and to be blessed by him in my life. And so now I'm working in Searcy, Arkansas as one of the youth ministers at the College Church of Christ, and just started in September of the past year. And so it's only been a few months, but it's been a phenomenal few months, and it's been a really great experience of growth and learning and just all around good times. And so, yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, that CRC school is a pretty good school.
It's pretty great.
Yeah.
It's pretty great.
And but I know a lot of the teachers that were there when I was there have kind of moved on now, and so it's a lot of new faces when I was there for the lectureship. This past but that's always to be expected. But you're down there in Searcy. You're a youth minister there. What have you been teaching on or studying lately?
Yeah, so lately, specifically on Wednesday nights, I teach the junior high 7th through 9th grade class. And we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount section by section, and it's been a really great study of just challenging the kids to this is actual teaching that you can live out in your life. This is practical Christianity, and so it's been really great challenging them in that, and then also challenging myself in areas that I need to be challenged as well.
Mm-hmm. That can be one of the most difficult challenges to translate from words on a page to actions that are done by the individual, and that's a pretty important study. And so I know you're probably given some good stuff. But as we said, we appreciate taking your time to be with us here tonight. I know youth ministers they stay pretty busy, and so we want to let you know that we value your time. So we're glad that you're here with us tonight. But as we said earlier, we're going to be studying Numbers chapter 13 and 14, the story that we're taking a look at kind of across these chapters. But it's going back to a time in which the Israelites they've escaped, they've been freed from Egypt. God heard their cry. He sent a deliverer, and Moses, a man by the name of Moses, went to Egypt, and through the power of God, they were able to be freed from that situation, and they were able to cross the wilderness. They had a lot of obstacles to go through. They had a lot of things to get through, but they have seemingly hit the finish line here, and they have reached the edge of the promised land. But they God instructs Moses in the early parts of this chapter to go and send out 10 spies, and so they go out and they have they spy out the land, and then they come back and give a report. And I believe it's starting in verse 25 is where we have our the report of the spies.
Yeah.
But Garrison, when you read the story, what are some of your first thoughts that come to mind when you think about this story that takes place in Numbers 13?
I think this is a really awesome story that is pretty well known to a lot of people. I can remember learning about this story in Sunday school growing up in church, and so it's a really neat story that shows a moment of weakness for the Israelites, but teaches a valuable lesson, not just for the Israelites in that day, but for us today. And just recently, I've been introduced to a really neat connection with this story and something that's really fundamental for Christianity. And I'm just excited to share that. And this is a story where, two men, Caleb and Joshua, they kind of shine, and they're the heroes of faith in this story. But it's just really interesting to see the connection with this story and New Testament and the foundations of Christianity. So I'm really excited to share that.
Yeah, I think it was Paul who said, all scripture is given by inspiration. It's all profitable, and so
Right.
all parts of the Bible are they're for a different purpose. They have a different use, but all of it's profitable in some way, in some
That's right.
fashion. And this is no different. And I think this is in some ways this is a story of what what fear can do. What the power that fear can have over a person and the decisions that they make. But it's definitely, as you said, it's definitely a showcasing a time in which they show a little bit of weakness, and of course, it's easy to kind of say that somebody else would do that, or I would never do that, but we as people have moments of weakness too, and so it doesn't really excuse the bad decisions that they're going to make in the story, but I guess it does make it a little bit more understandable, as we know how life goes. But to kind of frame this discussion, kind of frame what's going to go on here, what is some background information that we need to know in order to fully dive in to this story?
Yeah. So one thing that I think is interesting that I want to start with the background is at the very beginning of Numbers chapter 13, we see in verse 1 that it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan. Why that's interesting to me is because in the next book, in Deuteronomy, when Moses is retelling this story, right in the first chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses tells it slightly differently. He says that the men of Israel came to Moses and asked him, can we send spies ahead of us to spy out the land, the towns that we're going to come to, the land that we're going to enter? And Moses agrees with that request. And then we find out that obviously Numbers 13 tells us that this is a part of God's plan as well. And so it's not a contradiction, but that comparative text with Deuteronomy chapter 1, I think, is interesting, that the men of Israel came to Moses asking for spies to be sent ahead. And then in Numbers 13, the Lord speaks to Moses and says, yes, you should do that. You should send spies into the land. And I think that's an interesting detail because it might play into the response of the 10 spies. So it might show an introductory sight of fear in the Israelites, them asking Moses, can we send spies ahead of us so we know what we're getting into, so we're not blindsided, so we can prepare for what's ahead. And that in and of itself is not wrong, or that in and of itself is not a weakness or a request of weakness, but it might give us a hint into the mindset of the Israelites of how they're already approaching their journey to the promised land. And so I just wanted to start with that. And then the obvious important piece of information, background to the story, is that multiple times already leading up to the story, God has promised to give Israel this land. He has promised them on several occasions that they need only to obey him and walk into the promised land and carry out his instructions, and the land will be given to them. And that makes their response to the report even more heartbreaking, of them knowing that this is promised, that God has told them countless times that this is going to be your home and I'm going to make it work out. I'm going to have my hand in every situation, and yes, it's going to be difficult. It's not a excuse to sit back and just wait for it to happen, but it's a push to follow God's instruction and know that God is going to carry out his promise. And then when we find out their reaction to the report of the 10, it's just even more heartbreaking in the side of that.
Yeah, it is, and that's interesting. I didn't pick up on that, but that's an interesting detail to look at. And like you said, that's natural to do, because when you think about the promises that were given them, it's told that they were going to get a land flowing with milk and honey. It was a promised land, a Canaan land, but there's never any mention in those promises of the struggle that they were going to have in order to take that land. I mean, a lot of the book of Joshua is them fighting battles in order to take this promised land. And so this is going to be a difficult process. But like you said, if they wanted to know what was ahead, what is going to be be in the future. And if I was there, I would want to know the same thing. I would want to know if there's any obstacles ahead. And they maybe with some of they had already fought some battles, getting there with the different groups that they had encountered, and so maybe that got them to thinking about, are we going to have to fight more? Can we do it? Maybe a little bit of doubt, kind of creeped in, but they are right there, at the finish line here. But they, as you mentioned, it wasn't just the report of the spies, but it's the reaction of Israel to that report, almost as if they were kind of expecting it, or kind of expecting something similar to that. And that's interesting to look at. But if you want to take a look at the passage here in Numbers chapter 13, and we want to say hi to Donna Humes. She's here. Hope that you are doing well. We appreciate you stopping by. But in Numbers 13, there in verse starting in verse 25, it kind of lays out the story of this report that they give. And as we know, the report's not favorable. It's not good that the report that the 10 spies give. They talk about how good the land is, but yet they also talk about how strong the defenses are, and the people are, and how big they are, and how there are giants who walk the land. And so they give this type of report to them. But when we take a look, at the story, and when you analyze, how like you said, how these people reacted, what are some things that we can learn about the characteristics that these people had, and maybe some of the negative qualities that they had?
Yeah. One thing that I find very interesting is at the beginning of the report, it all of the men seem to agree, all of the 12 spies agree with each other that it is a land flowing with milk and honey, which is a direct reference to the promise that God gave them in Exodus. God gave that promise to Moses from the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, that he will deliver the Israelites into a land flowing with milk and honey. And so they're echoing that language, saying this truly is the land that God has specifically brought us to by his purpose. And so they recognize that, and they accept that this land truly is the promised land. And then they start talking about the size of the grapes, the size of the harvest that they've brought back, and how it's a very prosperous land. And they start talking about where everyone lives. And once it gets to Caleb's report, specifically in verse 30, Caleb kind of quiets everyone down and tells them that we can do this. Like, God is on our side. Let us go up at once. And so this is where the 10 and the 2 start dividing in their report. And it's interesting that the rest of the report is filled with all the negatives in the land, specifically the threat of the people that live there. And so they talk about the Nephilim, or the descendants of Anak, and how they're giants. And it's interesting, if I were in the community of Israel hearing this report, based on the language used in verse 33, I would assume that this is a general statement of most of the occupants of Canaan, that, like, generally speaking, they are bigger, stronger, taller than we are. And Caleb doesn't really echo that sentiment. Caleb doesn't really put that forth. Caleb seems very confident that this is going to be a battle worth fighting, because they know that God is on their side and they will have victory. And so to me, it makes me wonder, were the people of Canaan generally bigger, stronger, taller than the Israelites? Or did the 10 spies, out of fear, kind of over exaggerate? And, I'm not saying they're flat out lying. I'm sure they did see stronger, bigger, and taller warriors in the land of Canaan, but perhaps it wasn't true of all of the people of Canaan. Maybe just a group of mighty warriors, the sons of Anak. That would have been a specific group, not necessarily all of Canaan. And
so, I think that's accurate, because like, who was it? Was it King Og, I think, or it was one of the kings in there that they face off against, who's like 10 feet tall or something. It's
right.
It's really tall. But yeah, I think that's as far as everybody being that way, that might not be the case.
Yeah. And so I found that interesting, that, maybe out of their fear, maybe out of their, I guess I would say it's most likely out of their fear, they tend to stretch the truth a little, and give a report that's not entirely true to the community of Israel. And so, they say that we felt like grasshoppers next to them, and then they add, and so we seem to. So that's at the end of verse 33, and that is just that's an assumption.
Mhm.
I would think. I wouldn't think they would have gone up while they were spying the land. They probably didn't go up to one of these giants and say, "Do you feel like we're grasshoppers next to you?" So that's an assumption that the people of Canaan looked at them as looked at them like grasshoppers. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's a I mean, if we go from, like, the account, like in later on in Jericho, when the spies go and spy out Jericho,
mhm.
they actually went into the city and they
Yeah.
actually, were around the people, and
Oh yes.
it almost got them in trouble. But
Mhm.
so we're not sure if these did that, but it seems like they got pretty close,
Oh,
to the
absolutely.
people, and so yeah, I doubt that they asked him that question, but the but yeah, they could have, I mean, we know there was going to be some stiff, stiff resistance, and that they might have, like I said, they might have exaggerated it to
Mhm.
some degree in order, because if you're going to convince, people, if you're going to convince them to not go, you want to convince them that this is something that is too hard, then you want to make, the best case, possible,
Right.
and that they may have been guilty of that.
Mm. Yeah.
But they uh they they uh they were able to go throughout this land, and then, like you said, in the early parts, they all agreed. They
Mhm.
agreed that it was a bountiful land. They agreed that it was, something that was great. But it when it came time to saying, let's go and occupy it, like Caleb said, they kind of fell off.
Mhm.
And these, these individuals had already, they had already seen some of the great things that God, was able to do,
Mm.
as far as, taking care of the Egyptian army and, and parting the Red Sea. They've been fed, by manna.
Mhm.
They've seen some spectacular things, already. And but they had kind of forgot. At least from what I've seen, they kind of forget, what God can do for them in this
Yeah.
case, and which is something that, like Caleb says, he it seems like him and Joshua, that they're not saying that we really have the strength to do it, that we have the physical, advantage for it, but they're saying that God can give us,
Mm.
the strength to overcome this.
Mm.
And it was like two different perspectives that these two groups were looking at things with, and that caused you for a different message.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it's a shift in perspective can mean a whole lot, when you're
Mm.
making decisions, such as this, of whether to go in, or to go out, to follow through with the promise that God has given you, or to to sit back, as they did.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
being
Well said. Matter of perspective. Yeah.
and we can be guilty of the same thing sometimes. We can be
Mm.
forgetful of what God can really do, and in our life as well. I
Yeah.
mean, we serve the same God who said, let there be light, and there was light. He
Mm.
spoke a word and created, all that we know, that exists. And we also, and that same God is the one who cares enough for us that he would go through all that he did in the gospel story in order to give us a hope of salvation, to give us a chance, to be saved.
Mm.
And so we can't forget, for one, how big God is, but also, the things that he's already done, for us. And because he's
Yeah.
done a lot when you begin to think about it.
Yeah. It's really interesting to notice when you study the history of Israel, especially when stories are kind of back to back as they are in our Old Testament. It's really interesting to notice how short term Israel's memory seemed to be,
Hmm.
um, how they just so easily forgot things that we consider huge monumental moments that
Hmm.
we would think, oh, I'd never forget that, like the crossing of the Red Sea, like that's amazing, that's miraculous, I'd never forget that. And then the Israelites are so quick to turn around and like they do in this report to say it'd be better if we just went back to Egypt.
Hmm.
Every time they face some little hiccup along the road.
Yeah, that's not the first time that they've
No,
said that. No.
definitely not. Um, But it's interesting that in this account, they almost seem more eager to go back to Egypt, because they actually start plotting to stone Moses and Aaron and choose a new leader to take them back. And I could be wrong, but I don't know if that level of intensity is found in any other accounts where they want to go back to Egypt.
Yeah. This was serious. Like they were planning to basically, like you said, to kill these people. Get somebody that would take them back, and then move on back. And I believe God steps in in order to rectify this situation. But it's it is I mean, I guess when you see all of the things that God does, maybe they got a little complacent. I don't know, but it's hard to get into the mind of people back then who had such a different way of life. But it was definitely this was, as far as Moses and Caleb and Joshua were concerned, this was a matter of life or death when it rose to that intensity, like you said, that they had. It's good to see Carlene here. Hope that you are doing well. We appreciate you being here with us tonight. But as we know, there's negative qualities, but there's also positive qualities usually. And in most situations, in most stories, there's also there is generally two sides of which you can learn. And so when you think about positive characteristics or positive qualities that we can get from this story, what are some that we can gather, some that we can kind of note and that we can observe so that we can learn from this?
Yeah. So to sum it up really precisely, this is an example of fear taking precedence over faith. And even in the midst of fear overpowering faith, we see examples of godly men in the midst of this turmoil choosing faith over fear. Caleb and Joshua and Moses, they don't give up on God. They don't give in to that fear. And fear is an interesting thing. I believe there are 366 verses in the Bible that talk about do not fear or something of that nature. And so there's one for every day of the year, including one for leap years. Got that extra one in there. And so it's really interesting that the Bible gives so much instruction on do not fear and don't be afraid and things like that. And so I think a lot of times we have this idea that the opposite of faith is doubt, but more occasionally in our lives, the thing that stops us from fulfilling and carrying out our faith is fear. Not necessarily doubt, but just being afraid of things that are unknown, things that are just things that we don't understand, things that might get us, a bad reputation, or things that might exclude us from the popular crowd, or things that the list could go on and on of all the things that create fear in us. And so Caleb and Joshua just really exemplify this mindset of faith is not the absence of fear. I can't imagine Joshua and Caleb facing the situation without any sense of fear whatsoever, but their faith was strong enough to overcome and overpower the fear in their hearts. And so I think that's a really, really interesting and really important example for us, that we're going to face times in our lives that create fear in us. And there's going to be things that we're afraid of, that we're anxious about. But to know that, like you said, we serve a God that is powerful enough to speak the world into existence. And if he is powerful enough to do that, then he's powerful enough to protect us from what things make us anxious and afraid. I mentioned that I'm studying through the Sermon on the Mount with the junior high on Wednesday nights. And this last night, we covered the section in Matthew chapter 6, do not be anxious, do not worry. And so it was really interesting that, Jesus uses common sense and logic to show that God takes care of his children. He says, look at the lilies of the field and how beautiful they are. And King Solomon himself was not clothed in so much beauty. And look at the birds of the air. They don't work the farm. They don't toil. They don't reap, and yet they have food to eat and a barn to sleep in. And so he uses that natural imagery and that common sense to make our minds, our logical human brains, come to the conclusion that, oh yeah, God does take care of nature, and God created us, and God takes care of his creation. And so I just think it's really interesting that Caleb and Joshua really exemplify, teachings that are important and carry throughout the entire story of Scripture.
Yeah, they the attitude that they have, like you said, translates, to a lot of different situations. And one of the things that is noted, this was not easy, for something, for them to do. And I think one of the qualities, that fear has is that it generally takes the path of least resistance. It's generally, about, at least in some cases, it's about, where you turn your focus, inward, and you think about, how can I, take care of myself. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of things that we can face, in this world, that can make us, anxious, that can give us, that fear. It's not always just like a, you know, running into battle, and, physical things, but there's, like you said, in our day and time, and everybody's different. Everybody may fight, these different battles, and they may have things that make them anxious that don't bother, somebody else. But I like how you put that, because you're going to deal, with fear. It's a part of life. It's an emotion, that we have. It's something that we deal with. But it's not like, that it, expels, that, and that it doesn't exist. We don't pretend that it doesn't exist, but, we serve a God who's strong enough to help us, conquer that, help us to get through that. And, fear, it also, it paralyzes, us, sometimes it causes us, to kind of sink into, inaction. God has told us there's great, great reward. There's great things to be had, for someone who's willing to, take up that cross, and follow him. Someone who's willing to work that harvest, just someone who's willing to, go out there and be the light of the world. There's a lot of great things, in store for that. But, we picking up your cross, being that light, like it's not easy sometimes, and fear gets the best of us all, I think, a time or two. But in this case, like you said, Caleb, and Joshua, and Moses, they knew where they stood. They knew that, they served a God who they had the faith that God was going to follow through, with his promises. And throughout the scriptures, that's something that God always does. He always follows through, with his promises.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, when you're studying in that Sermon on the Mount, some of the promises, that he gives us, you have doubt, that he'll follow through with that. Look at all these other stories that we find in the scriptures, and see how many times God let his people down. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But it certainly provides, an opportunity for us to learn from. But as we know, if you kind of, combine, these two things, and you kind of, take a look at them, and maybe as we take a look at our own situation, what are some lessons that we can take from this, and that we can maybe apply to our own way of living, or that we can, use, in our own faith. We may have already covered, some of these things, but what are some lessons that that we can take, from the story?
Yeah. So since moving down to Searcy, I'm part of a youth ministry team, and one of my co-ministers has this saying that he likes to say, and I've heard him say it quite a few times, and I see it really, really shine in this story, is that as Christians, we battle from a place of victory, not for victory, if that makes sense. And so Caleb and Joshua have this mindset of God has already promised this land. He's already promised the victory. Like victory has already been attained by God. And so when we step across this boundary and we step into the promised land to inhabit it, we are not, yes, we will face battles. Yes, we will face difficult, challenging setbacks, but we don't battle for victory. We battle from victory. And so that's something that one of my co-ministers says a lot, and it's really stuck with me, and it's just really awesome to see that. And I think it's true not only of Caleb and Joshua here and the Israelites, but it's true of Christianity in general. It's true of all of us. And if you want to, Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if you want to pull that up, I'm going to flip to it in my Bible. 1 Corinthians 15 is a really interesting chapter. It's quite lengthy, has a lot to do with resurrection and how that applies to our Christian walk. And so when you get down to the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verses 56 and 57, Paul has just given this lengthy talk on resurrection and what it means, the resurrection of Christ and how it applies to the resurrection of Christians in our lives, the new birth. And then he talks about death and sin and how they're very powerful. They're very formidable enemies, sin and death. But he comes to the conclusion in verse 56 that the sting of death is sin and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And so Paul talks about how powerful sin is in our lives and how it leads to death. And a lot of times we get locked in this mindset of physical life where death seems like it's the final chapter, where death seems like it's the end. Mm-hmm. And what we learn from Jesus' resurrection and the power of his death, burial, and resurrection is that sin and death may be powerful foes. They may be formidable enemies, but they are not powerful enough to decide the end of our story. Death may be the end of physical life, but God has written chapters and chapters for eternity of that story that go beyond our physical death. And so sin and death, though they are powerful in our lives, they are not the deciding factor of the end of our story. And Paul says here in 1 Corinthians 15 that something that Caleb and Joshua understood, that God has given us victory. And Paul says specifically through Jesus Christ, God has given us victory. And so now when we walk through life, when we face challenges and setbacks and we face things that cause us fear and anxiety, we can know that victory is ours. That victory has already been won. We are not fighting in this life for victory, but we are fighting through this life from a place of victory in Christ. And that is what keeps our faith from being overcome by fear. Just knowing that and realizing that and understanding it to the extent that it really affects how you carry out your life and how you carry yourself and how you face difficult situations. And nowhere in Scripture does it ever promise us a carefree, easy life.
Mm-hmm.
It does promise that the victory has already been won, and to just follow God in faith, and to carry out His will in our lives, and to give yourself, to imitate the death, burial, and resurrection, as Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 15, and that is how you, because that is how the victory was won, that is how you then receive the victory, is by imitating that death, burial, and resurrection. It's just it's a beautiful picture that permeates all of Scripture, from Numbers 13 that we're studying tonight all the way through the end of the Bible, that when God promises victory, you don't have to be afraid of losing the battle, because the war is already won.
Yeah. And I believe there's a couple songs about that, aren't there?
There are.
Victory in Jesus.
That's right.
Faith is the victory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that can be encouraged. That should be an encouraging thing, for us to know, that we, like you said, the battle's there. It's won, and we just have to make that decision on which side we're going to choose.
That's right.
And if we're going to follow through. And some of the people that we see, such as Paul, such as the apostles, such as Stephen, no matter what the world does, that they can't take that faith away from you. And you can make that decision to leave it behind. But if you're someone who has your eyes set where they need to be, if you're looking forward to that promise, if you're carrying that cross, there's nothing that can take that away from you. And like you said, the Christians can be some of the most optimistic people, on this earth, because they know what the future holds. They may not know what's going to happen tomorrow or what's going to happen, next week, but at the end of the day, they know what's after this life, and that can lead to a joyous life to live, because we know there's wonderful things to look forward to, But it's definitely something to remember, the effect that fear can have, and how Christ has overcome that, and how He has the ability to give us that victory as well.
Yeah.
Garrison, we appreciate you being here with us tonight. As we kind of close down, we want to maybe take a look at the promises that God has given us, and maybe what we can take that from this, what we can learn from those promises from this story, and maybe from what we look at in the New Testament. But do you have any closing thoughts, or any thoughts about the promises that God can give us?
Yeah, I think of the promise that Jesus gave, that He came to give us life, and life to the full. And the only thing standing in the way of us having that full life that Jesus promises is our fear. And so just to remember that there's never a time in all of history where God falls short on a promise, or turns His back on His promises. And just to know that fear is a part of life. We're going to be afraid, and God guides us to these crossroads in our life where the choice may seem terrifying at times, but to know that God doesn't just lead us to the crossroads and then stop leading us. He leads us through that decision. He leading us on toward beyond the crossroads. And so just to have the mindset of God is faithful to His promises, and that is reason enough to let faith be stronger than fear.
Absolutely. Like I said, God never lets His people down. He's someone who has always even though sometimes we may not agree. Sometimes we may wish things were done in a different way. But as He says, God, His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not not our thoughts. And
Mm-hmm.
He's ultimately, at the end of the day, His plan, is, it is for the best. And as we know, He, we can count on those, and we can count on those promises. But it does require us, to meet Him there. He does require us to put action on it, as we saw with the Israel. In this case, they had to make that decision. They had to go through, and ultimately, this would cost them, many years, of wandering. They would eventually get to the promised land, but it would take them, much longer time
Mm-hmm.
to get there. But we know that, if we know that God gives us, what we need, to know. He gives us what we need in order to be a Christian and to live, that life. But we have to be the ones who take action on that. God's not going to give us that, without our consent or without our action. But we got to go through it, and we got to be someone who lives that out, in our life. And I believe that's an important part, of being a Christian. And like I said, it's something we have to do. But if we have the faith that can conquer, that fear, we know at the end of the day we're going to be all right.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, we appreciate you being here. We've been going for about 48 minutes, so we'll probably wind this down right here. But if somebody is in the Searcy area, they want to get in contact, with the church down there, if they might want to go to some of your events, how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah. I mean, it's College Church of Christ. And so if you search College Church of Christ on Facebook, there's plenty of, information there. Our website is collegechurchofchrist.org, real simple. And, we're fairly big congregation. So, not too hard to find.
Yeah. You're right next to Harding University, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you can find Harding, you can maybe find the
Across the street. That's right.
Yeah. But we really appreciate you being here. I think we've had a great study tonight, and I know we wish you all the best. Going through the summer and ministering down there. We know you're going to do some great things.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Midweek Bible Study. We'll be back here next Thursday night for another episode. If you found this helpful, please feel free to share it with anybody you think it would benefit. But ultimately, we hope that you enjoyed this, and hope this benefited you and uplifted you in some way. But until next time, we hope you can go out and be the light of the world and glorify God in everything that you do. We'll catch you next time.